The mountain air was still thick with fog when Rachel Hartman stepped off the transport van, her boots hitting the gravel with barely a sound. At 52, she moved with the quiet precision of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. The airfield stretched before her like a ghost town of aviation history. Sleek F-35s gleaming under protective canopies on one side, while a row of battered A-10 Thunderbolts sat forgotten on the other. Rachel had been a combat pilot for 15 years before the budget cuts. She'd flown close air support missions in 3 different theaters, her call sign Steady earned after she'd brought home a crippled A-10 with half its tail shot off. But that was before the Air Force decided they needed fewer pilots and more drone operators. Before her squadron was disbanded with nothing more than a reassignment letter slipped under her door. Now she was here at Mountain View Air Base, officially classified as Reserve Inventory Command, a fancy way of saying she was the person they sent to count old planes before they were scrapped. The irony wasn't lost on her. They'd given her a clipboard and a coverall uniform with no name patch, like she was some civilian contractor instead of a decorated veteran. "Look what maintenance dragged in," she heard one of the younger officers say as she passed the command trailer. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, fresh from flight school, was lounging against the equipment cart with 2 other pilots. "Bet she's never even seen the inside of a cockpit." His buddy, Captain Ryan Foster, chuckled. "Probably has to use a paper manual just to figure out which end is the front." Rachel kept walking, her jaw tight but her expression neutral. She'd heard worse in her 15 years of service, but it still stung. These kids had no idea she'd logged more combat hours than all of them combined. To them, she was just another aging technician, invisible and irrelevant. She approached the line of A-10s with a mixture of nostalgia and sadness. These birds had been her life once. She knew every rivet, every system, every quirk that made them legendary. The 3rd aircraft in the row caught her attention. Tail, number 721. Its paint was faded, but something about it looked different, less abandoned than the others. As she began her inspection, clipboard in hand, she noticed the younger pilots had followed her. They stood at a distance, watching like she was some kind of curiosity. "You know those things were built in the Stone Age, right?" Morrison called out. "Probably still runs on steam power." Rachel ignored him, running her hand along the A-10's wing. The metal was cold, but not frozen. Odd for a plane that supposedly hadn't been started in months. She made a mental note and continued her inspection, writing down panel integrity and system status with the same methodical precision she'd once used for pre-flight checks. What none of them knew was that Rachel had been coming to this airfield for 3 months now, supposedly cataloging aircraft for decommission. But she'd been doing more than just counting planes. She'd been maintaining them, keeping them alive, waiting for... what? She wasn't sure. Maybe just hoping that someone, somewhere, would remember that these old birds still had fight left in them. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the tarmac, Rachel finished her inspection and walked back toward the maintenance hangar. She could feel the eyes of the younger pilots on her back, could hear their whispered comments about the has-been they'd stuck with the junk duty. If only they knew what she was really doing out here. If only they knew that while they were playing with their computerized fighters, she was keeping the heart of American close air support alive with nothing but determination and a toolbox full of memories. The real test was coming soon. She could feel it in the mountain air, in the way the radio chatter had been getting more urgent lately. And when it came, they'd realize that sometimes the old ways and the old pilots were exactly what you needed to get the job done. 2 weeks later, Rachel was elbow-deep in the engine compartment of A-10 number 721 when the first signs of trouble began. The morning briefing had been tense. Reports of a Special Forces team trapped in a narrow valley after a landslide. With weather closing in fast, the new high-tech aircraft couldn't operate in the conditions, and the drone fleet was grounded due to wind shear. She'd been working on the hydraulic system when Chief Master Sergeant Tony Valdez approached. Unlike the younger officers, Valdez had been around long enough to know quality when he saw it. He'd watched Rachel's quiet competence for weeks, noting how she never asked for help, never complained, and somehow always had exactly what she needed. "Morning, Hartman," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades in the service. "That bird giving you trouble?" Rachel looked up from her work, wiping grease from her hands. "Not trouble, just making sure she's ready." "Ready for what? These planes are supposed to be headed for the boneyard." She met his eyes steadily. "Supposed to be, but they're not dead yet." Valdez nodded slowly. He'd suspected as much. "You've been doing more than inventory, haven't you?" "I've been doing what needs to be done." Before he could respond, the bass klaxon began wailing. Emergency scramble. Both of them looked toward the command center where they could see figures running between buildings. Rachel's blood quickened. She recognized the signs of a real crisis. "All available aircraft to ready status," came the announcement over the loudspeaker. Immediate search and rescue operation. Weather deteriorating rapidly. Rachel and Valdez exchanged a look. They both knew what all available aircraft meant. The F-35s and F-16s that couldn't fly low enough in this weather, and the helicopters that couldn't handle the mountain winds. The A-10s weren't even on the list. "They're going to lose those boys," Valdez said quietly. Rachel's hands stilled on her tools. She'd been in situations like this before, good soldiers dying because the right equipment wasn't available or because someone had decided it was too old, too risky, too expensive to maintain. She'd watched it happen in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in a dozen other places where bureaucracy met reality and real people paid the price. "Not if I can help it," she said. The next few hours were a masterclass in military frustration. Rachel watched from the maintenance bay as pilot after pilot tried to get authorization for low-altitude flight. The weather was deteriorating rapidly, with ceiling dropping to 500 feet and visibility near zero. The sophisticated avionics systems on the newer aircraft couldn't handle the conditions. They were designed for high-altitude, high-speed operations, not nap of the earth flying in. A mountain storm. Morrison and Foster were in the command center along with the other young pilots, arguing about sensor packages and GPS accuracy. Rachel could see them through the windows, gesturing at screens and maps, their voices rising in frustration. "We need real-time terrain mapping," Morrison was saying. "Without it, we're flying blind." "The drones can't operate in this wind," Foster added, "and the satellite feed is worthless with this cloud cover." Rachel knew they were right, and completely wrong. They were thinking like modern pilots, dependent on technology that failed when you needed it most. But she'd learned to fly in an era when pilots had to trust their instincts, their training, and their aircraft, when you couldn't rely on computers to tell you where the ground was. As the day wore on, the situation grew more desperate. The trapped team was running out of time, and the weather was only getting worse. Rachel could see the exhaustion and defeat creeping into the faces of the command staff. They were good people, but they'd been trained for a different kind of war. Finally, as the sun began to set, she made her decision. She walked to the command center, her boots echoing on the concrete. The duty officer looked up as she entered. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area during operational—" "I know exactly what this is," Rachel said calmly, "and I know exactly what you need." Major David Collins, the base operations officer, looked up from his position at the command table. "Ms. Hartman, we're in the middle of a crisis here. Whatever maintenance issue you're dealing with will have to wait." Rachel stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "The A-10 on Pad 5 is fully operational. All systems green, including navigation and targeting. It can fly the mission you need." The room went quiet. Collins frowned. "Those aircraft are decommissioned. They're not rated for operational status." "I've been maintaining them for 3 months," Rachel said. "Every system check, every component inspection, every safety protocol. That aircraft is ready." Morrison spoke up from across the room. "Even if that rust bucket could fly, who's going to pilot it? We don't have anyone qualified on the A-10 anymore." Rachel's eyes never left Collins's face. "I am." The silence that followed was deafening. Then the laughter started, quiet at first, then building. Morrison was the loudest, but even some of the senior officers were shaking their heads in disbelief. "Ma'am," Collins said, trying to be diplomatic, "you're not on the active flight roster. You haven't held operational status in how long?" 7 years, Rachel said. But I've never stopped flying, not in my head, not in my heart. That valley they're trapped in, I've flown it before. I know the terrain, the wind patterns, the approach angles. I can get to them. Foster stepped forward, his voice dripping with condescension. Lady, this isn't a simulation. This is real combat conditions. You can't just jump in a 40-year-old plane and I've been flying longer than you've been alive. Rachel cut him off, her voice like steel. I've brought planes. Home with engines on fire, with half their wings shot off, with systems failing faster than I could count. I've flown missions that would make your worst nightmare look like a Sunday afternoon. Collins held up a hand. Even if what you're saying is true, I can't authorize. Those soldiers are going to die, Rachel said simply. Because you're too worried about regulations to let someone who can actually fly that plane save them. The room erupted in argument, voices rising and falling as the debate raged. But Rachel could see it in their eyes, the growing realization that she might be their only option. And more than that, the fear that she might actually be right. The argument in the command center was still raging when the radio crackled to life with a transmission that made everyone's blood run cold. Base, this is Falcon Team. We've got wounded, repeat, we have wounded. Medics down and we're taking small arms fire from the ridgeline. Weather's getting worse and we're losing our shelter. If someone doesn't get here soon, we're not going. To make it through the night. The voice was strained, professional, but Rachel could hear the fear underneath. She'd heard that tone before. Good soldiers trying to stay calm while everything went to hell around them. Collins grabbed the microphone. Falcon Team, this is Base. We're working on extraction. Maintain position and, sir, with respect, working on it isn't going to cut it. We need evac now. Rodriguez is bleeding out, and Thompson's got a compound. Fracture. We can't wait for the weather to clear. The transmission cut to static. In the silence that followed, Rachel could feel the weight of decision settling on the room like a shroud. These weren't just names on a roster. They were real people, with families, with futures that hung in the balance. Major Collins looked around the room, his face grim. Options? The helicopters can't fly in this weather, Foster said. Wind shear would tear them apart. F-35s can't operate below 1,000 feet with this cloud cover, Morrison added. The terrain following radar is useless in these conditions. What about the drones? Someone asked. All grounded. We've already lost 2 to the crosswinds. Rachel watched the faces around her, seeing the slow realization dawning that they were out of options. These were good officers, skilled pilots, but they'd been trained for high-tech warfare. They'd never learned to fly by the seat of their pants, to trust their instincts when the computers failed. There has to be something, Collins said, but his voice lacked conviction. There is, Rachel said quietly. I told you. The A-10 can. Do this mission! Morrison whirled on her, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Will you give it a rest? We don't have time for fantasy solutions from someone who hasn't flown in combat since the Clinton administration. Rachel's jaw tightened. I flew my last combat mission in Afghanistan in 2017. Call sign steady. You can look it up. Something in her voice made Morrison pause. Foster, meanwhile, had moved to a computer terminal and was typing rapidly. His face went pale as he read something on the screen. Wow, he whispered. Collins, you need to see. This. The major moved to the screen, his expression changing as he read. Rachel Hartman, Captain, United States Air Force. Distinguished Flying Cross, Silver Star, Purple Heart. Combat missions, 247. A-10 flight hours, 3,047. Last mission? He looked up at Rachel with new respect. You brought home a damaged aircraft with 2 wounded soldiers, flying on instruments only through a sandstorm. The citation says you saved 8 lives that day. The room had gone completely quiet. Rachel met Collins's eyes steadily. The A-10 I've been maintaining is fully operational. All systems are green. I've checked every component, tested every circuit, verified every safety protocol, and I know that valley. I've flown it before. When? Collins asked. Different war. Same mountains. I know the approach angles, the wind patterns, the terrain features. I can get in there, drop a flare to mark the extraction point, and get out. Your ground team can move to the marked position, and the helicopters can extract them once they're clear of the valley. Morrison stepped forward, his voice still skeptical. Even if the plane works, even if you can fly it, how do we know you won't just get yourself killed? Then we've lost the rescue option and gained another casualty. Rachel's eyes never left Collins's face. Because I'm not ready to die, Lieutenant. And more importantly, neither are those soldiers. The radio crackled. Again. Base, this is Falcon Team. Rodriguez just lost consciousness. We're running out of time here. Collins closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. When he opened them, his voice was steady. What do you need? Rachel felt a surge of adrenaline, the same feeling she'd had before every combat mission. Access to the aircraft, a flare kit, and 30 minutes to prep, and I need someone to clear me for takeoff. I can't officially authorize this, Collins said. If something goes wrong, you'll have one dead pilot instead. Of 6 dead soldiers, Rachel interrupted. I'll take those odds. Foster spoke up, his voice grudging but respectful. The weather's only getting worse. If you're going to do this, it has to be now. Rachel nodded. Then let's stop talking and start flying. As she turned to leave, Collins called after her. Captain Hartman? She turned back. Bring them home. Rachel's smile was tight but confident. That's what I do. Outside, the wind was howling across the tarmac, and the A-10 sat waiting in the fading light like a sleeping predator. Rachel walked toward it with purpose, her mind already shifting into the familiar rhythm of pre-flight preparation. Behind her, she could hear the younger pilots following, their skepticism slowly giving way to something that might have been respect. The old bird was ready. The question was whether the Air Force was ready for what she could do. The A-10 Thunderbolt II sat in the growing darkness like a monument to a different era of warfare. Rachel approached it with the reverence of someone returning to a sacred place. Every scratch, every dent, every faded marking told a story of battles fought and won of pilots who had trusted their lives to this ungainly, beautiful machine. Chief Valdez was waiting for her by the aircraft, a toolbox in his hands and a grim smile on his face. Figured you might need some help with the pre-flight. Thanks, Chief. How much time do we have? Weather's deteriorating fast. If you're going to do this, it has to be in the next 20 minutes. Rachel nodded, her hands already moving over the aircraft's systems with practiced efficiency. She'd been maintaining this particular bird for months, but combat readiness required a different level of inspection. Every component had to be perfect. There would be no second chances in the mountain valley. External stores? Flare dispenser is loaded and tested, Valdez replied. 6 illumination rounds, 30-second burn time each. Should be more than enough to mark the extraction point. Rachel climbed the ladder to the cockpit, her movements smooth despite the months away from active flying. The familiar smell of aviation fuel, hydraulic fluid, and worn leather enveloped her like an old friend. She'd spent thousands of hours in cockpits just like this one, but tonight felt different. Tonight she wasn't just another pilot on another mission. Tonight she was the only chance 6 soldiers had of coming home alive. The younger pilots had gathered around the aircraft, their earlier mockery replaced by a mix of curiosity and respect. Morrison stepped forward, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. Captain, I owe you an apology. I didn't know about your service record. Rachel looked down at him from the cockpit. Apologies don't bring people home, Lieutenant. But I appreciate it. Foster was studying the aircraft systems with professional interest. These old birds don't have GPS, terrain-following radar, or digital mapping. How are you going to navigate in zero visibility? Same way pilots did it for 50 years before GPS was invented, Rachel replied, running through her instrument checks. Dead reckoning, terrain recognition, and prayer. This valley has landmarks that don't show up on satellite maps but stand out clear as day when you're flying nap of the Earth. What landmarks? Morrison asked. Rachel's hands moved over the controls as she spoke. There's a waterfall about halfway down the valley's eastern slope. Even in this weather, you can hear it over the engine noise. 3 clicks south of that, There's a rock formation that looks like a broken tooth. The extraction point is in a clearing 2 clicks north-northwest of that formation." "You memorized all that?" Foster asked, incredulous. "I flew this route a dozen times during the Afghanistan deployment. Different mission, same terrain. Some things you don't forget." Chief Valdez appeared at the cockpit rail with a headset. "Comms are set to tactical frequency. You'll have direct contact with Falcon Team once you're in the valley." Rachel accepted the headset, noting the familiar weight of it. "How are they doing?" "Not good. Last transmission was 5 minutes ago. Rodriguez is still unconscious, and they're reporting increased small arms fire from the ridgeline." "Someone really doesn't want them to leave." Rachel's jaw tightened. Enemy fire complicated everything, but it didn't change the mission. If anything, it made speed more critical. "Engine status? All systems green. Fuel topped off, hydraulics checked, weapon systems, well, the gun's operational if you need it." "Let's hope I don't." Major Collins approached the aircraft, his face grim in the harsh light of the maintenance floods. "Captain, I need to ask you one more time. Are you certain about this?" Rachel looked out at the storm clouds gathering over the mountains, at the wind-whipped fog that reduced visibility to almost nothing. Any sane pilot would say it was impossible. The smart play would be to wait for better weather, to let the sophisticated aircraft with their advanced systems handle the mission when conditions improved. But the soldiers in that valley didn't have time for smart plays or better weather. They needed someone willing to fly an old plane through impossible conditions because it was the right thing to do. "I'm not certain about anything except that those soldiers are going to die if someone doesn't reach them tonight," she said. "This aircraft can do the mission. I can fly it. That's as certain as it gets." Collins nodded slowly. "All right, you're cleared for takeoff. But, Captain?" He looked up at her, his expression serious. "I'm not just sending you to drop a flare. I'm sending you to prove that experience still matters in a world obsessed with technology. Don't make me regret it." Rachel smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn in months. "Roger that, sir. Steady as airborne in 5 minutes." As the ground crew began removing the wheel chocks and disconnecting the external power, Rachel ran through her final checks. The A-10 rumbled to life around her, its twin engines spooling up with a sound like controlled thunder. The cockpit displays came alive, showing her everything she needed to know about the aircraft's condition. All green, all ready. She looked out at the faces gathered around her aircraft, young pilots who had dismissed her as a relic, ground crew who had worked miracles to keep these old birds flying, and officers who had finally remembered that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. "Falcon Team, this is Steady," she transmitted. "I'm coming to get you. Hold on." The storm was waiting. The enemy was waiting. But Rachel Hartman was ready for both. The A-10 rolled down the runway with deliberate purpose, its engines building, power with a sound like distant thunder. Rachel felt the familiar sensation of acceleration, the moment when the aircraft transitions from earthbound machine to something capable of flight. The nose lifted, the main gear left the runway, and suddenly she was airborne, climbing into the storm-darkened sky. The weather hit her almost immediately. Turbulence slammed the aircraft from multiple directions, making the stick shake in her hands. Rain hammered against the canopy, and the visibility dropped to near zero. The younger pilots watching from the ground would have been terrified, but Rachel felt a strange sense of homecoming. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd lived for. Flying by instinct and experience when technology failed. "Base, this is Steady. Airborne and proceeding to target area. Weather's rough but manageable." "Copy, Steady. Falcon Team reports. They're taking increasing fire. They need that flare ASAP." Rachel banked left, following the compass heading she'd memorized years ago. The GPS was useless in these conditions, the terrain following radar was an expensive paperweight, and the digital maps couldn't show her what she needed to see. But she had something the younger pilots lacked, the ability to read the landscape. Like a book written in stone and water, she dropped to 500 feet, then 400, then 300. At this altitude, the margin for error was measured in seconds. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and she'd be scattered across the mountainside. But this was where the A-10 excelled, where its rugged construction and forgiving flight characteristics made it the perfect tool for an impossible job. The sound of the engines changed as she adjusted power, settling into the steady rhythm that would carry her through the valley. She could feel the aircraft responding to her inputs the way a well-trained horse responds to a skilled rider. The stick in her hands was an extension of her will, the rudder pedals as natural as walking. "Steady, this is Falcon Leader. We can hear you coming. Where are you?" Rachel checked her instruments, cross-referencing her position with the mental map she'd carried for years. "About 2 minutes out. I need you to describe your position relative to the broken rock formation." "What formation? We can't see anything in this weather." "Look for a vertical rock spike about 50 feet high, shaped like a broken tooth. It should be visible even in this storm." There was a pause, then, "Got it. We're about 200 meters north of that formation, in a depression between two ridges." "Perfect. I'm coming in from the south. When you see the flare, move immediately to the marked position. The extraction team will be inbound as soon as I confirm your location." Rachel could see the valley opening up before her, its familiar contours. Still visible despite the storm, the A-10 bucked and rolled in the turbulent air, but she held it steady, riding the currents like a surfer on a dangerous wave. Years of experience guided her hands, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought would have been too slow. She spotted the waterfall first, its white spray visible against the dark rock face. That put her exactly where she needed to be. Banking right, she lined up for the flare run, her finger hovering over the release button. "Falcon team, flare inbound, 30 seconds. That's when the muzzle flashes started. Small arms fire erupted from the ridgeline, tracers streaking past. Her canopy like deadly fireflies. Rachel banked hard left, then right, using the A-10's remarkable agility to avoid the worst of the incoming fire. She'd been shot at before, but never while flying a precision navigation run in zero visibility. "Steady! They've got us bracketed! We're taking heavy fire!" Rachel's jaw tightened. The enemy knew exactly where the extraction was supposed to happen, which meant they'd been monitoring radio communications. The soldiers were walking into a trap, but it was a trap she could help them escape. She lined up for the flare run again, this time approaching from a different angle. The A-10 shuddered as small arms rounds impacted the armored hull, but the old warthog was built to take punishment. She'd flown birds home with much worse damage. "Falcon team, get ready to move. Flare dropping in 5, 4, 3, 2, mark!" She pressed the release button, and the illumination flare deployed with a soft thump. Brilliant white light bloomed below her, turning the storm-lashed valley into a tableau of stark contrasts. She could see the soldiers now, dark figures, moving across the rocky ground, and she could see the enemy positions on the ridgelines. "Falcon Leader, this is Steady. I count at least 20 hostiles on the eastern ridge, more on the western side. They're dug in good." "Copy that. We're moving to the flare position now." Rachel banked around for another pass, her mind racing. The extraction helicopters wouldn't be able to land with that much enemy fire, which meant she needed to do something about the hostile positions. The A-10's 30mm cannon could clear those ridge lines, but it would mean engaging in combat without authorization, potentially starting an international incident. The radio crackled with panicked voices. "Steady! Rodriguez is hit again! We need immediate extraction!" Rachel looked down at the illuminated valley, at the soldiers trying to reach safety while enemy fire poured down from the heights. 6 American soldiers against an unknown number of hostiles in a foreign country where they weren't supposed to be. The safe play would be to mark the position and leave the shooting to someone else. But Rachel hadn't become a decorated combat pilot by making safe plays. "Base, this is Steady. I'm engaging hostile forces. Repeat, I am weapons hot." "Steady negative. You are not authorized to engage. Repeat, you are not authorized." Rachel switched off the radio and armed the cannon. The A-10 had been built for one purpose: to destroy enemy forces that threatened American soldiers. Tonight, it would do exactly what it was designed for. "Falcon team, keep your heads down. Steady is making a gun run." The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon was a weapon of legend, a 7-barrel, 30mm monster that could destroy tanks and reduce enemy positions to rubble. Rachel had fired it in anger before, but never in conditions like these, never while flying. By instinct through a mountain storm with zero visibility. She lined up on the eastern ridgeline, where the heaviest concentration of muzzle flashes indicated the main enemy position. The A-10 dropped to 200 feet, skimming the valley floor like a vengeful ghost. At this altitude, she was well within range of small arms fire, but the Warthog's titanium armor could absorb incredible punishment. "Falcon team, gun run inbound from the east. Stay down." Rachel squeezed the trigger, and the A-10 shuddered as the massive cannon opened fire. The sound was like thunder being torn apart, a bone-deep roar that echoed off the valley walls. 30mm. Shells poured down on the enemy positions, each one capable of punching through armor plating. The ridgeline erupted in explosions of stone and dirt as the cannon rounds found their marks. The enemy fire slackened immediately. Rachel banked. Hard left, pulling Gs that would have torn apart a less robust aircraft. The A-10 groaned but held together, its rugged construction proving its worth once again. "Good hits on the eastern ridge," came the voice of Falcon leader. "Most of the fire from that position has stopped." But the western ridge was still active, and Rachel could see muzzle flashes from at least 3 different positions. She banked around for another pass, the A-10 responding to her inputs like a faithful warhorse. The storm was getting worse, with wind shear that threatened to slam her into the mountainside, but she held the aircraft steady through sheer determination and decades of experience. The radio crackled with an emergency transmission. "Steady. This is base. You are ordered to return to base immediately. Repeat, return to base." Rachel ignored the transmission. She had 6 soldiers depending on her, and she wasn't about to abandon them because some desk jockey was worried about paperwork. She lined up on the western ridge, the cannon's targeting system as simple and reliable as the aircraft itself. "Falcon team, second gun run inbound from the west. Keep your heads down." This time, the enemy was ready for her. Concentrated fire erupted from multiple positions, tracers crisscrossing the air around her aircraft. Rachel felt the A-10 shudder. As rounds impacted the armored hull, heard the distinctive ping of bullets striking titanium. The left engine temperature spiked momentarily, then settled back to normal. The old bird was taking hits but keeping flying. She squeezed the trigger again, and the cannon roared its defiance. The western ridgeline disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris as 30mm shells tore through the enemy positions. Rock splinters flew like shrapnel, and several of the muzzle flashes went silent permanently. "Outstanding shooting, Steady! Enemy fire is down to almost nothing!" Rachel pulled up and around, checking her instruments. The left engine showed some temperature fluctuation, and she had a hydraulic leak in the secondary system. But the aircraft was still fully operational. More importantly, the valley below was now secure enough for extraction. "Base, this is Steady. Hostile forces neutralized. Extraction zone is clear for pickup." There was a long pause before the response came. "Steady, this is Colonel Blake. Return to base immediately. We'll discuss your unauthorized engagement when you land." Rachel smiled grimly. Let them discuss it all they wanted. 6 American soldiers would be going home tonight because she'd been willing to break the rules. "Falcon team, this is Steady. Your ride should be inbound in approximately 10 minutes. Move to the flare position and prepare for extraction." "Copy that, Steady, and thank you. Rodriguez is stable and we're all mobile. You saved our lives tonight." Rachel felt a familiar warmth in her chest, the satisfaction that came from a job well done. This was why she'd become a pilot, why she'd dedicated her life to the Air Force, not for the glory or the recognition, but for moments like this, when skill and determination could mean the difference between life and death for the people who counted on her. She circled the valley one more time, watching as the soldiers moved to the extraction point. The illumination flare was still burning, casting its ghostly light over the scene. In the distance, she could hear the sound of approaching helicopters, the extraction team finally able to reach the soldiers she'd rescued. The A-10 climbed into the storm, its engines running smoothly despite the battle damage. Rachel turned toward home, her mind already shifting to the confrontation that awaited her. She disobeyed direct orders, engaged in unauthorized combat, and used military assets without permission. By the book, she was in serious trouble, but she'd brought 6 soldiers home alive. In her mind, that was all that mattered. The old warthog had proven once again that sometimes the best technology was the technology that worked when everything else failed, and sometimes the best pilots were the ones who knew when to follow orders and when to break them. The A-10 touched down at Mountain View Air Base 47 minutes after takeoff, its landing gear kissing the runway with the gentle precision of a perfectly executed approach. Rachel taxied to the maintenance area, noting the crowd of personnel waiting for her. Ground crew, officers, and even base security. It looked like half the base had turned out to see what would happen to the pilot who had defied direct orders. Chief Valdez was the first to reach the aircraft as Rachel shut down the engines. His face was a mask of professional concern as he climbed the ladder to the cockpit. "How's the bird?" he asked. "Left engine's running a little hot, and I've got a hydraulic leak in the secondary system. Nothing that can't be fixed." Rachel unbuckled her harness and handed him her helmet. "But she brought me home, just like always." "Captain Hartman, you're to report to the base commander immediately." Rachel turned to see Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base deputy commander, standing at the bottom of the ladder. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone carried the weight of official displeasure. "Yes, ma'am," Rachel replied, climbing down from the cockpit. "Just let me—" "Immediately, Captain. The colonel is waiting." Rachel walked across the tarmac, noting the stares and whispers from the ground crew. Some looked at her with admiration, others with concern. The younger pilots who had mocked her earlier were notably absent, probably hiding in the ready room and trying to figure out how they'd so badly misjudged the maintenance lady. The base commander's office was a shrine to modern military efficiency. Multiple flat-screen monitors, digital displays showing real-time base operations, and a desk that looked like it belonged on a starship. Colonel James Blake sat behind it, his face granite hard with disapproval. Major Collins was there too, along with Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and a man in civilian clothes who had Inspector General written all over him. "Captain Hartman, sit down," Blake commanded. Rachel remained standing. "Sir, before you say anything, I want to report that Falcon Team was successfully extracted. All 6 soldiers are alive and en route to medical treatment. Mission accomplished." "Mission?" Blake's voice rose. "You had no mission, Captain. You had direct orders to return to base, which you ignored. You engaged in unauthorized combat operations, used military assets without permission, and potentially created an international incident." "I saved 6 American lives, sir." "You disobeyed direct orders!" Blake slammed his hand on the desk. "Do you have any idea what kind of position you've put this command in? What if you'd been shot down? What if your unauthorized attack had killed civilians? What if 6 soldiers had died while we sat here worrying about paperwork?" Rachel interrupted, her voice calm but steel-hard. "Sir, with respect, those men didn't have time for proper authorization." "They needed someone to act, and I acted." The civilian spoke up for the first time. "Captain, I'm Inspector General Davies. This is a very serious matter. You've violated numerous regulations, potentially committed acts of war without authorization, and she saved 6 lives," came a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Chief Valdez entering the room, followed by Morrison and Foster. The 2 young pilots looked uncomfortable but determined. "Chief, this is a closed meeting," Blake said. "Sir, I think you need to hear this," Morrison said, stepping forward. "We monitored the entire mission from the command center. Captain Hartman's actions were extraordinary." Foster nodded agreement. "Sir, she flew a 40-year-old aircraft through conditions that grounded our most advanced fighters. She navigated by dead reckoning through a mountain storm with 0 visibility, and she neutralized hostile forces that had pinned down our people for hours." Blake's expression didn't soften. "That doesn't change the fact that she disobeyed direct orders." "Sir," Collins interjected, "with permission, I'd like to play the recorded radio transmissions from Falcon Team." Blake nodded curtly, and Collins activated a digital recorder. The room filled with the voices of the trapped soldiers, panicked, desperate, reporting casualties and incoming fire. Then came Rachel's calm, professional responses. Followed by the sounds of the rescue operation. The final transmission was from Falcon Leader. "Base, this is Falcon Leader. All personnel extracted successfully. 6 souls aboard the rescue bird, all alive thanks to the pilot of that A-10. I don't know who she is, but she's a goddamn hero. Rodriguez is stable and we're all going home. Falcon Leader out." Silence filled the room. Inspector General Davies looked uncomfortable, shuffling through his papers. Blake stared at the recorder, his expression unreadable. Chief Valdez stepped forward. "Sir, I've been in this Air Force for 28 years. I've seen a lot of pilots, good ones and bad ones. What Captain Hartman did tonight, that was flying like they don't teach anymore. Old school, seat-of-the-pants flying that saved lives when all our fancy technology failed." Morrison cleared his throat. "Sir, I owe Captain Hartman an apology. We all do. We assumed she was just maintenance personnel. We didn't know about her service record, her combat experience. We were wrong." Foster nodded. "The truth is, none of us could have flown that mission. We don't have the experience, the instincts. We rely too much on technology. When it failed, we had nothing left." "But she did." Blake leaned back in his chair, his anger seemingly deflated. "Captain Hartman, you violated regulations. You disobeyed direct orders. By the book, you should be court-martialed." Rachel met his eyes steadily. "Yes, sir, I understand that. However," Blake continued, 6 American soldiers are alive tonight. Because of your actions, that counts for something." Inspector General Davies spoke up. "Colonel, regardless of the outcome, there must be consequences for—" "There will be consequences," Blake said firmly. "Captain Hartman, effective immediately. You are restored to active flight status. Your A-10 aircraft will be returned to operational condition, and you will be assigned as the senior pilot for the remaining Warthog squadron." Rachel blinked in surprise. "Sir?" Blake stood up, his expression finally showing a hint of respect. "The Air Force has been so focused on the future that we forgot the value of experience. Tonight reminded us that sometimes the old ways are the best ways. We need pilots who can fly when the computers fail, who can make decisions when headquarters is out of contact." Davies looked frustrated. "Colonel, this sets a dangerous precedent." "The precedent," Blake interrupted, "is that in this Air Force, we value results over regulations when American lives are at stake. Captain Hartman got results." Rachel felt a surge of emotion she hadn't experienced in years. After 7 years of being forgotten, dismissed, treated like a relic, she was finally being recognized for what she'd always been, a pilot. "Thank you, sir," she said simply. Blake nodded. "Don't thank me yet, Captain. Your first assignment is to train these hotshot pilots how to fly the old way. Teach them what it means to be a pilot when all the fancy gadgets fail." Morrison and Foster exchanged glances, then Morrison stepped forward. "Sir, we'd be honored." "To learn from Captain Hartman." Rachel looked at the young pilots who had mocked her just hours earlier. They were looking at her with genuine respect now, eager to learn from someone who had proven herself when it mattered most. "It would be my pleasure," she said. As they filed out of the office, Chief Valdez fell into step beside her. "So how does it feel to be back in the cockpit officially?" Rachel smiled, the first truly happy smile she'd worn in years. "It feels like coming home, Chief. It feels like coming home." 6 months later, Rachel Hartman stood on the flight line at Mountain View Air Base, watching her students prepare for their final check ride. Morrison and Foster had become her most dedicated pupils, trading their reliance on technology for the hard-earned wisdom of experience. The transformation had been remarkable, from cocky young pilots who couldn't function without GPS to capable aviators who could navigate by instinct and fly by feel. The A-10 squadron had been not only saved from decommission but expanded. Word of the mountain rescue had spread throughout the Air Force, reaching all the way to the Pentagon. Suddenly, everyone remembered why the Warthog had earned its legendary status. The aircraft that had been deemed obsolete was now recognized as an irreplaceable asset for missions that required precision, durability, and the human touch. "Captain Hartman?" Rachel turned to see a young woman in flight gear approaching. "Lieutenant Amanda Brooks, fresh from pilot training and assigned to the newly reformed 432nd Attack Squadron. She was one of a dozen new pilots who had specifically requested assignment to fly the A-10 under Rachel's tutelage. "Yes, Lieutenant?" "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for everything you've taught us. Before I came here, I thought flying was all about computers and displays. You showed us it's really about understanding the aircraft, reading the environment, making decisions when the systems fail." Rachel smiled. "You're welcome, Brooks. But remember, the real test isn't what you do when everything works perfectly. It's what you do when everything goes wrong and you're the only thing standing between your people and disaster." "Like that night in the mountains?" "Exactly like that night." Rachel's eyes drifted to the A-10 that had carried her through that storm-lashed valley. Tail number 721 now bore fresh paint and a small inscription just below the cockpit. "Steady," her old call sign, restored to honor both the aircraft and the pilot who had refused to let either be forgotten. Chief Valdez approached from the maintenance hangar, a satisfied grin on his weathered face. "All birds are green, Captain. Your students are ready for their final exercise." "What's the scenario?" Rachel asked. "Search and rescue in mountain terrain, communications failure, GPS jammed, and weather below minimums. They'll have to navigate by landmarks and fly by instinct." Rachel nodded approvingly. It was exactly the kind of mission that would test everything she'd taught them. "Perfect. Let them know they're cleared for takeoff." As the young pilots climbed into their aircraft, Rachel reflected on how much had changed. The base that had once treated her as an invisible relic now recognized her as one of their most valuable assets. The aircraft that had been destined for the scrapyard were now the backbone of a renewed, close air support capability, and the pilots who had dismissed her as a has-been were now her students, eager to learn the skills that couldn't be programmed into a computer. Major Collins, recently promoted and now the squadron operations officer, joined her on the flight line. "Any regrets about coming back to active duty?" Rachel watched as the first A-10 taxied toward the runway, its distinctive profile unchanged after 4 decades of service. "Only that it took so long. This is where I belong, Collins. In the cockpit, training the next generation, keeping these old birds flying. The Pentagon's been asking questions about expanding the A-10 program. They want to know if we can train more pilots like you." "There aren't more pilots like me," Rachel said simply. "But there can be. It just takes time, patience, and a willingness to learn from the past instead of always chasing the future." The radio crackled to life as the training flight checked in. "Tower, this is Phoenix Flight. 6 A-10s requesting clearance for departure." "Phoenix Flight, you are cleared for takeoff." "Good hunting." Rachel listened to the familiar sounds of aircraft engines spooling up, the controlled chatter of pilot communications, the orchestrated chaos of military aviation at its finest. This was her world, the place where she'd always belonged. And she'd almost lost it because people had forgotten that experience mattered as much as technology. The lesson of that stormy night in the mountains had spread far beyond Mountain View Air Base. Throughout the Air Force there was a new appreciation for veteran pilots, for aircraft that had proven themselves in combat, for the wisdom that came from decades of experience. The military's rush toward automation and unmanned systems hadn't stopped, but it had been tempered by the recognition that human judgment and skill remained irreplaceable. As the last A-10 lifted off into the afternoon sky, Rachel felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She'd not only saved 6 soldiers that night, she'd saved a piece of military aviation history. The Warthog would fly again, piloted by men and women who understood that flying was more than just operating a machine. It was an art form that required dedication, skill, and the courage to act when action was needed. "Lieutenant Brooks," voice came over the radio. "Lead, this is 2. I've got a problem with my GPS. Request navigation assistance." Morrison's voice replied calmly. 2, this is Lead. Forget the GPS. Use your landmarks and trust your instincts. Remember what Captain Hartman taught us. The aircraft knows the way home if you know how to listen to it." Rachel smiled. They were learning. The next generation of pilots would be ready when technology failed them, just as she had been ready. That night, when everything else had fallen apart, the A-10 Warthog would continue to fly, carrying on a tradition of close air support that stretched back to the beginning of military aviation. And Rachel Hartman would be there to teach each new class of pilots that sometimes the old ways were still the best ways, that experience mattered more than technology, and that the greatest weapon in any pilot's arsenal was the courage to act. When others hesitated, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Rachel stood on the flight line, watching her students practice the ancient art of flying, and knew that she was exactly where she belonged. The old bird had found her wings again, and so had she. In a world that often forgot its heroes, Rachel Hartman had reminded everyone that true strength came not from the newest technology or the flashiest equipment, but from the quiet competence of those who had dedicated their lives to serving others. She had turned rejection into redemption, dismissal into distinction, and obsolescence into opportunity. The warthog flew on, and so did the legacy of those who refused to be forgotten. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.